So the main point of the history lesson was what was the background as to how we got to where our training doctrine is now. We fluctuated, and I say we, I mean military commanders for the last 1,000 years have fluctuated how much emphasis they put on this. Like right now, the Army does not give a shit about training this, as you might have experienced. So there was a big emphasis within the U.S. military for about a century, because it was the best tool you could make use. Individual small arms, there wasn't a whole lot of other options. As we started to get past into the 1950s era, we're at a position where there was a lot of push towards getting away from individual skills. As in, what could we do to supplement with equipment to get rid of the need to train people? And that's what led to the Train Fire program through the late 1950s, different individual weapons, special purpose individual weapons, Project Salvo, and a bunch of other things through the 1960s. The idea was, what can we do to make this effective without having to spend time or money to teach anybody, because we don't care enough to teach anybody. Ultimately, what they ended up with was a Train Fire program in 1980. That is the program almost everyone in the Army is currently familiar with. That's the one we've been living with since the late 1970s. That is where we got to this 4 fundamentals model, because the idea was to strip it down to its bare bones minimum. What is the least amount of effort we could spend trying to teach a minimum product? Okay. Hit rate, you have to hit more than 55%. There's no judgment of precision. Anywhere on the silhouette is considered a go, right? 23 out of 40, that's a 57.5% hit rate. That's it. I'd be failing in elementary school, but the Army says it's a go. There was no discussion of ballistics or, well, how the sights work, or any procedure for going beyond what that qual was. Now, the original intention was you would do things like field shooting exercises, 25 meters, full distance, etc., etc. You would eventually try to learn to do this, pass an initial entry training model, and you were supposed to use targets like this. Targetry like this was things like Force Comp initiated a 25-meter postal match. The idea was to spur on competitive development for people to learn how to use this at higher levels later. Has anyone seen any of these targets before? One of you that's listening. So the one on your right was actually a 25-meter postal match that you were supposed to shoot, send your results in, and it was a way to kind of encourage higher level shooting beyond just the qual stuff. The one on the far left is a suppressive fire field target. If you get real close and look, you'll see that there's actually silhouettes hidden in this landscape. And the idea was to teach field shooting, and you could run this on a reduced range at 25 meters. That's unofficial. These are official Army targets, and I'll wager that no soldier has ever seen them, because we just stopped with that. Group in 0, go to the qual range, pop up targets, and call it good, and no one ever learned anything beyond it. The ramifications of that was a training process, as the Army Research Institute found in 2011. Most drill sergeants weren't even aware of what the doctrine stated, much less were teaching anything beyond it. That's what their official findings were. That's 82nd Airborne found the same thing. They conducted a full assessment of all their paratroopers in fiscal year 2017. And these active duty infantry paratroopers had a whopping average qual score of 25.44 out of 40, with 23 being the minimum passing score. That's what the 82nd can do. And that's the status of our training procedures to date. So that leads into, why did all the training circulars come in line to remove all the field manuals? Well, it's because we need to do something different. You got 40 years of experience showing this old model doesn't work, so the new training strategy was, we need to put something into effect to teach a higher level of instruction, and that's what the new training standards are for.
She's been
20.0 is the individual weapons training strategy. That is the basically the policy that we're supposed to be following. It's been out since, well, these manuals started to come out in 2016, so they've been out for 5 years. So as of right now, the Army does not have any official procedure to enforce whether or not anyone's aware that these books exist, much less that anyone's read them or is enforcing them. But the basic idea was to create a training strategy that is a progressive and gated structure. It's a series of steps that you take to go through to make sure that everyone is spun up on what they're supposed to do, so that you're trying to create a situation where the majority of soldiers can go to the range and qual, get a minimum passing score on their first attempt. In fact, the current training standard is you're supposed to shoot the qual once. You don't shoot it until you run out of ammo or until someone wants to quit. You shoot it once, you pass it or you fail it, and you're done. That's what the standard action is. The progressive gated structure is intended to ensure you take the steps to get there. Okay, so the first line is fundamentals first model, which is a poor choice of words because everyone's used to the whole 4 fundamentals model, which was officially redacted in 2016. The idea was the previous 4 fundamentals model was to create a very shortened, simplified, and dumbed down shot process. What is the minimum steps we can do to get away with getting a minimum passing score of over 55%? Okay. The realization is that your doctrine needs to allow for something that's more progressive. You may start with something more simplified at first, but you want to progress to a point where you can go through a series of steps, officially there's 6, so that by the time you hit the qual range, you can just shoot it once and you're ready to go and first time done because you're good enough to just do that. We being the shooting team, Army Reserve shooting team, on our official Army Reserve website, have our Army Reserve Marksman newsletter. We have Cliff Notes version of all this doctrine. So you can read an 800-page manual, or you can read the 3-page article I wrote on it. Take your pick to get brushed up on this. Part of the strategy is to maximize virtual systems. Engagement Skills Trainer is the preferred, or one of the preferred systems. SVT is another one. The old LMTS works perfectly fine for anyone willing to use it. The main thing is getting units to use them. The old LMTS program, where the idea was that if the unit just owned the thing, they could run this at any given battle assembly, and you could have people circle through them on a quarterly basis, so that you would be able to run this, get everyone to practice this, so by the time you went to the range, you're not trying to figure it out on the day. Anyway, that's the idea with virtual systems. A progressive and gated approach is that you culminate in a series of steps that lead to a successful qualification route. The problem with the old model was you ignore it for a year or more, you drag the rusting rifles out of jail, out of the arms room, and then we try to figure it out on the morning of, when we're stumbling around on the zero range, to try to remember how to do all this. Oh, I guess we should have a PMI, someone would do something for 5 to 15 minutes, and then we try to figure it out. As opposed to having a strategy we do little pieces at any given battle assembly to try and get prepared so that when qual day happens, we actually are stepped into being able to roll through it. Some examples of that, besides the simulators that we should be using, would be running various smaller courses that lead, as a validation, that lead up to the qual. In other words, don't think of it as, well, I got a Nero at 25 meters, let's go try the qual. Instead, it should be, I do an initial group and zero procedure, that should immediately follow with some kind of simple field course. I want to test that I have a base understanding that I'm even in a position that I might be able to pass the qual. Because if I can't, there's no point in going over to that range. I should work on drills on the 25 meter range, for example, work through magazine changes or position changes, or shoot whatever it is to brush up on the stuff so that a validation exercise, when finally successfully passed, indicates a gate has been gone through. I am ready to progress to a next step. Instead of, I think I'm good, I feel good about it, let's go and try it, and then we're shooting hopers. We're not prepared to go and get the qual done. Culminate into a combined arms collective training event. So the idea is that you were to facilitate a train as you fight. The problem with that, in the past, people thought, train as you fight, well, you should wear your body armor like all the time. As opposed to, why don't we focus on what the task is at hand? If it makes more sense to zero slick, let's do that. And let's focus on working a shot process in order to learn how to shoot better, so that we're not encumbered by something that would not facilitate us shooting better. Shoot series of smaller exercises rather than fixating on, well, it's a 40-round qual and that's it, as opposed to we can do shorter exercises, dry exercises, don't even need live ammo, so that we can step through things to be better prepared to hit the qual and do it. Part of it should include rules of engagement decision making. It's not really a component of the official qual, so this is another problem here. Units are just supposed to magically do this on their own, and we got more than a half a century of experience indicating that doesn't work, but that's part of the strategy, is to add in things that go into rules of engagement and decision making. Okay, so there's 6 official tables as a part of this progressive gated structure. They are Table 1, Preliminary Marksmanship Instruction and Evaluation. That's your base PMI. That's your classroom portion. That's going over what these standards actually are, making sure people are brushed up on what the doctrine even says. Have we bothered to read the book? Do we know what it says? Okay? That should include some kind of a quiz as a check on learning. Table 2, next gate up. That's your preliminary live fire simulations. You should have practiced shooting drills and procedures, shot process development, using simulators before you show up to the range. Okay? You shouldn't be going there to figure it out on the day. You should have practiced in some manner. And the cheapest, easiest way to do that is use a simulator. The cheapest simulator you could use is dry fire. But that's hard to get a delible mark on. So use something like EST, LMTS, any number of laser simulators, a Mantis, anything that you could use to simulate going through a shot process to determine, is the soldier shooting better? Are they shooting to some standard that indicates they'll probably pass when we put a score on them? Table 3 are drills. These don't require ammo. This is stepping through. Every appendix delta in all the new I say new, they're 5 years old now. The current training circulars has an appendix that covers drills for that specific weapon system. But they have a common structure so that the drills you have in the handgun manual is very similar to what you have for the rifle, which is similar to what you have for the machine gun. The differences will be weapon specific. We don't have draw from a holster with an M2 machine gun, for example, for obvious reasons. But the structure of the drills match up to what you need to learn to make that thing work. Okay? Table 4 is your basic live fire. This is where you do your grouping in zero. The standard is that you should go to the live fire range, 25 meters, and shoot 5 groups of 5 rounds and be done. Because you're not supposed to be going there to learn how to do it. You're supposed to be going there to validate, or rather calibrate your equipment. The idea is you learned how to shoot in Table 2, or refreshed your shot process in Table 2, you're just going out there to use live ammo to get your initial calibration, okay? So that should be an indicator of, if you can't have folks step up, shoot a group that's too standard, 4 minute of angle, or at least under 6, and they can't do that within the first couple groups, they need to get yanked from the line and fixed. Because you should be able, within a handful of groups, 5 or less, be able to not only shoot to standard, but get an effective zero with an appropriate offset as determined by a training manual based on the equipment you're shooting, so that you can go double check when you get at full distance to confirm that you're going to actually hit. Part of the zero process is confirming at distance. If you don't have LOMA equipment, location of miss and hits, an electronic system like a SUA system, or a shot marker, or any number of other systems available, at the very least ensure that you're running your pop-up range in bob mode so that everyone gets a chance to take a poke at targets at full distance to ensure that they can hit them. This is a common failure point. You leave the 25-meter range, and we haven't even confirmed if your zero is good at distance or not. Here's your 40 rounds, and hopefully you'll make it on your first try. Because we're never confirming that you can actually hit a 300-meter target on purpose, slow fire, just take a shot at it and hit it. Because if you can't do it that way, how are you going to do it reliably when we put you on a timer, pop-up targets that have to be done within some time limit? Table 5 is practice. you should have some kind of a validation exercise, preferably at full distance, preferably on the kinds of targets you'll engage for the qual, to confirm that you're good to go. Doesn't have to be the full qualification. It could be a reduced as in number of targets. You could do it in 10 rounds, 5 rounds even. You run through a sequence where we have targets pop, say half a dozen targets pop up under some time limit similar to the qual, and you can't hit 60-70% of them in a practice scenario, you're probably not going to do better when we do it for record. Okay? Now, part of the mistake people make is the qualification, that's table 6. By record, officially, you are supposed to get exactly one chance. You step to the line to shoot table 6, the qualification, you do it once. You pass it or you fail it, and you're done. Oh, get more ammo at the ammo point. No, you're done. You messed up. It's like you go on a mobilization. Well, how many times do you get to redo the mission until you get it right? No, you do it right. You do it one time, you do it right or wrong, and that's the result. Okay? A lot of folks mistakenly think, well, that means they're taking our training resources away. They're pulling our ammo. No. You had 5 tables of available progressive gated structure to work through to lead to table 6. You can shoot all of the ammo that STRAC allocates for you and your unit. Shoot all the courses you want. You can do complete run-throughs of qualifications if you want. But when you toe the line and say, this is for record, table 6 qualification, you do it once and you're done. Kind of like what you're supposed to do to prepare for a mode. You do all the steps to get ready, and you go there to do it right the first time, is what's supposed to happen. Same thing here. I think that puts more urgency into going to the qual range. Like, okay, this is it. You got one chance. Are you ready? Well, I'm not sure. Well, maybe you should practice more. You need to be in a position like, hell yeah, I'm ready. That's the idea. And then I call this the unofficial table 7. This is not in the training circular. The idea is that you can spur on improvements in ability by having a robust, we'll call it additional exercises, which is a nice way of saying competitions. Great book by a guy named Paul Bronson, Top Dog, which is basically a research textbook on all of the different studies the military and civilian organizations have done on the effects of competitive anything, shows that nets a better training, a more robust, better training result by having folks engage in some kind of a competitive program. Putting your skills up against a score to compare to others is the best way to spur on improvements. All you do is think, I shoot the qual and that's it, you're going to get mediocre results across the board. The qualification standard the Army uses in basic training is the same standard you use for the rest of your career. 82nd Airborne, active duty infantry, combat arms, qualification standard is the same standard as a quartermaster, new recruit going through basic. So when do you get better at this? That's what this would be for. What's the next step up the ladder to try and get better beyond just merely being able to pass the qual? Okay, so that's the overview of the training strategy. Does anyone have any questions on that? Okay, Training Circular 3-22.9 is now officially 5 years old. It is now in change 3, by the way. Sadly, the Army does not have any procedure to check whether anyone's ever read it or not. But anyway, this is what the standard is. As what was discussed with the history portion of this, the idea is if you want a better result, what's the definition of insanity? Keep doing the same things over and over again and expecting a different result. Well, if you don't change your standard and doctrine over the course of 40 years, you're probably not going to get anything better. So this was that change. It was in effect officially in 2016. It's now in change 3. All of the other small arms manuals followed suit. We're all using, okay, real quick. Part of it is safety. So 4 basic safety rules. These are pretty much common in civilian training, and the Army has been using them forever. This is one of the facts that stayed the same. So the basic rules are: Rule 1, treat every weapon as loaded. If you get it in your head every time you pick a firearm up, any kind, military issue, civilian or otherwise, if it's in your head that it's loaded, you've eliminated almost all your problems. Most people get shot accidentally because I didn't know it was loaded. So if it's in your head it's loaded, you've already solved a lot of problems. So if it's loaded, how do you treat it? Rule 2, never point the weapon at anything you don't intend to destroy. If you make it a point, they're always loaded, and therefore don't point it at stuff that I don't want to shoot. Again, you've eliminated a whole bunch of problems. Rule 3, keep your finger straight and off the trigger until you're ready to engage a target. If you're not intending to shoot, don't touch the trigger. These are really actually series stack-ups of errors that would lead to problems. If you treat it like it's loaded, you don't point it at stuff because you're thinking it's loaded, you don't touch the trigger because, you know, it's loaded, you're going to eliminate a lot of problems. People have negligent discharges or hurt someone unintentionally. You have to violate at least 2 of those, probably 3 of them, to get to a point. You don't touch the trigger, it can't go off. You don't point it at someone, you can't shoot them. And if you think of it as being loaded all the time, you're probably going to not do the other 2. Okay? Rule 4, ensure positive identification of the target and the surroundings. It's just a matter of knowing what you're shooting at. That goes into rules of engagement, target identification, decision making, all of that. Now, on line with the safety, one of the issues that we kind of see as a problem with why is it that sometimes you have soldiers conduct poor weapon handling and have a problem? Well, we kind of force bad procedures on them almost as a routine matter of course. And probably one of the worst examples of this is rotting weapons on ranges. So for starters, AR 385-63 is Army reg on range safety. Want to take a guess how often rotting weapons on ranges is mentioned in the official reg on range safety? It's not mentioned. The word rod doesn't appear in the text. So if the reg doesn't say we have to rod them, why do we do it? Because that's what we see people do, and therefore that's what people do. It's not in the reg telling us to do that, okay? It ends up creating an artificial procedure that you're using in lieu of actual safe weapon handling. Rotting weapons is destroyed weapons, which I'll show you a picture right here. It's an example. That's what happens when you get something in the barrel and you touch a shot off. Now, the rotting procedure is supposed to reduce the chance of having a bore obstruction, but that was caused because there was a piece of a rod that was left in the barrel when that soldier loaded that rifle and shot it. So the thing we did for safety ended up causing the very problem it was supposed to prevent. That's not cool. But we use one-piece welding rods now, so that shouldn't be a problem. Well, the other issue is that shoving pieces of metal up a barrel is going to damage it. Circled in red are nicks on the crown of that muzzle that will degrade accuracy. And if you're shoving a metal rod up the length of a barrel back and forth every time you go on a range, you will eventually cause that problem. Probably worse than all that, rotting forces violation of Rule 2, which again, don't point the muzzle at anything you don't want to shoot. I would like someone to demonstrate how you can get a rod up the muzzle of a barrel and not put your hands in front of the barrel. You're violating Rule 2. So you're on a live fire range with a weapon, putting your hands in front of the muzzle, and you probably didn't personally clear that weapon yourself. Awesome. What's probably even worse than that is, are we maintaining good muzzle control? This picture right here, where is that muzzle pointing? And what is that gray thing? Is that a bus or a building? I don't know. We're pointing the rifle off to the side of the range because I got to put a muzzle or a rod up at war. Or you just point it at your head. Anyway, so what could you do instead? How about you just treat the weapons as if loaded? Get used to carry procedures. Your drills in Appendix D have things like going through your carry, like low hang, safe hang, compressed ready, low ready, high ready. That's part of the drills that this manual discusses. Learning how to go through those steps and then run your range that way. If you want an additional visual check, just for an additional line of safety, empty chamber indicator is perfect for that. If you have something that shows that weapon is in condition green, if someone does make a handling mistake, it's now a teaching point instead of a tragedy. But you get people used to the idea of handling them like they need to in the field, they'll probably eventually learn to handle them like they do when they're in the field. If you put an artificial step in place, they're not learning how to handle them. And then we wonder why we get issues when we go on deployments and things, because we never learned how to handle them in a field environment to begin with. Well, because drill sergeant says I got to use the clearing rod. Okay, along with the safety concepts, we'll go into the safety status. That would basically be what loading condition is this weapon in. So the general color code we use for that is green, amber, red. Green means that there is no ammunition present in the weapon. So for a rifle-fed firearm, that means the magazine is removed. The chamber is empty. The bolt can be open or closed. Doesn't matter, but the main thing is that it's completely devoid of ammunition. You're on safe if the weapon allows for that, okay? So the idea would be you go to condition green. Green, show clear. Or something like that would be the command, have everyone show green or go show clear, all right? Amber means that you have a ammunition feeding device in place, a magazine in the case of a rifle, with the chamber empty. So you can rapidly put it into condition red to get it ready to go. Ammunition's on tap, but not in the chamber, okay? So it's like a next step up. And then condition red means you're fully loaded. You have a filled magazine locked in place, you have a cartridge chambered, and you're ready to shoot. And then it would be based on your SOP and then rules of engagement as to when you can engage. So from weapon safety status, we go to weapon control status. Weapon control status is basically a component of your rules of engagement. All right? So based on your SOP and the rules of engagement, you could be weapons hold, tight, or free. Weapon holds mean you don't engage unless you're engaged first or you're directly ordered to. So in other words, you're not supposed to shoot at stuff. Strictly self-defense or until you get formal orders saying so, don't shoot at anything, even if you think it might be a threat. Unless they engage you first, don't shoot. That's tight. I'm sorry, that's hold. That's weapon hold. Weapons tight is you engage only after positively identifying. So that goes in that rule safety 4, right? Safety rule number 4. Don't identify a target unless it's positively identified. Well, based on weapons control status, what's positively identified? Well, in this case, weapons tight means it has to be a known enemy or threat before I can shoot it. Okay? Weapons free is engage targets that aren't positively identified as friendly. So you still need to do safety rule 4 because they might be friendly, but if they are certainly not friendly, then you're supposed to shoot them. Okay? So a lot of times for range commands, we might just use a weapons free. You can do that on a pop-up range because you're probably not having friendly targets or no-shoots appear. Now, there are competitive events where you'll have no-shoot targets. Well, obviously you're not supposed to engage those. You get penalized for that. You can run courses of fire where you have it that the layout of the targets or some identifier, like it might be a photorealistic picture of a weapon versus, say, a badge or a cell phone. And part of that is like, okay, when I get to that portion of the range or when I pivot around and now can see the targets, the first thing I need you to do is identify if that's even a threat target or not. Might even have a number. This is how many shots you got to shoot at it, okay? So that would be part of your ROE decision-making step, which would work as an exercise, like that table 7 thing I talked about before. Okay. All right, so this is just an overview of that. This is the one part of the manual. It didn't change. Stoner pattern rifles and carbines work the same they did back since the 1950s. So basic info about how an M16 and M4 works all remains the same. Part of the new training model is, rather than using a simplified zero target, we are now trying to teach everyone what your angular deviation is, what it means, and how to use it. So we'll talk about that now. So the first one that we primarily use with rifles is discussing angular deviation in terms of minutes of angle. Does anyone know what a minute of angle is?
1 inch at 100 yards.
There you go. That's the easiest way to just say it, is an inch at 100 yards. So what this chart is showing you here is when you have a given angle, in this case a minute, that angle remains the same, but the amount it adjusts depends on how far away the target is. one way I found is helpful to help you visualize this is, pretend you, the shooter, are in the middle of a very large circle. And the target you are engaging is on the edge of that circle. So just like any other circle, a given angle remains fixed, but the amount of space it subtends will increase the longer the radius, or the range in this case, goes. So if it's an inch at 100, it's 2 inches at 200, it's 3 inches at 300, it's 4 inches at 400. All of those are 1 minute of angle, because it depends how far away we are. Okay? So basic idea is that you have 360 degrees in a circle, and just like there are 60 minutes in an hour, there are 60 minutes in a degree. This is a more thorough breakdown of that. It works out to 21,600 minutes in a circle. Just as there are 360 degrees in that same circle, it's a finer degree of adjustment. So just for reference, 1 degree of angle at 100 meters, how much does that subtend? Want to guess? If you're off by 1 degree of angle at 100 meters, it's about 5 feet. So that's why we don't use degrees on weapons. That's too crude of an adjustment. It'd be like reporting on your body comp thing, height, weight. How tall are you in miles? It's not a very good measure for that, but inches or centimeters works great, right? So this is kind of the same idea. Degrees would be a terrible thing, so minutes works better because it's a closer a metric to what we're trying to measure here, okay? So it's technically pi inches at 300 yards if you want to get real pedantic about it, but an inch per 100 is an easy way to do it, and for most small arms use, that's more than precise enough. Okay, the other one we want to worry about is mils. This is just another way to measure angles. We measure stuff in degrees, we can measure stuff in minutes, we can measure stuff in mils. A radian, I'll show the picture here, is an angle such that the radius is this, the arc length is the same length as the radius, okay? So if you have a triangle that describes an angle, it is a 1 radian angle if the radius of the circle is the same amount as the arc length around the edge of that circle. So that works out to 2 pi radians in a given circle. All right? We're discussing mils, so if anyone's paid attention when they did metric in elementary school, a mil is 1,000th of something, right? So if I have a millimeter, it's 1,000th of a meter. So a mil radian is 1,000th of a radian. So that works out to 6,283 radians in a circle. I'm sorry, 6,283 milliradians in a circle. Sorry about that. Okay? Which works out to roughly 3.5 minutes to convert back and forth. So why are we doing that? Well, for certain systems, you can use this for anything. It's gotten more popular to use mils in certain precision rifle applications. Minutes also will work, okay? Gunnery, since World War I, has commonly been measured in mils. All of our machine guns, tripod, T&E, and sights for machine guns and gunnery, artillery, mortars, are all measured in mils. You could just, I mean, I've seen old tripods, pre-World War I issue stuff, where it was all in minutes and degrees. So it's just a matter of having a system and understanding what the measures are. This is in the TC now because depending on which weapon you're using, it may have one or the other. Okay? So that's just an idea of how that works. That aiming reference can serve also as for range estimation. Okay? So if you have a target that is, say, 1/2 meter wide, call it about 18 inches wide, and you have an aiming reference that's supposed to be the same width as that object in appearance, you can use that to estimate how far away it is. So the M150 reticle, which you use in the ACOG, for example, that's exactly what that aiming reference is showing. You use the appropriate width of the reticle, which is your range estimation, to indicate about how far away it is, assuming that it's an E-type silhouette or something in similar size. Okay? This is just showing different kinds of reticles and how the sizes of them will appear based on how far away they are. Like you have a choke gauge here, for example. If the target of a given height fits underneath that angled bar, it will give you an estimate about how far away that thing is. It's going to appear bigger if it's closer, therefore it's going to appear under one of these closer distances on that gauge. Okay. All right, and this is just going over the same idea here. This is just giving some standard adjustments, so common things for rifles. Our iron sights typically adjust for windage about a half minute per click. The CCO adjusts the same. The M68 is about a half minute per click. Where am I at here? Okay, so for zero windage is showing you right here. Windage here at M16A2A4 at half minute per click. About a minute to a minute and a quarter for elevation, which is showing this here. Okay, any of that, if you're unsure, would be in the technical manual for that equipment, whether it's the sight or whether it's the rifle itself. It will have a list showing what the adjustment is in minutes or mils for that system. Okay. This is just showing use of the CCO, the M68. Some of the older versions have a 4-minute dot. Most of the newer ones have a 2-minute dot. So you can use that as an idea. If that's 2 minutes of angle, it should cover subtendon area 2 inches at 100, 4 inches at 200, right? Be 6 inches at 300, because that's how much that area, that angle, is subtending as you get further away. Okay, I already went over the ACOG. Yeah, basic idea with this particular sight setup is that on a the TA31, the aiming chevron here is 6 minutes wide, so it should appear the same width as an E-type silhouette at 300 meters. Because an E-type silhouette is going to be about 6 minutes. This is why the grouping standard still is 4 centimeters at 25 meters, because that's a 6 minute of angled circle, because that just happens to be what the apparent width of an E-type silhouette is at 300 meters. So you're not going to be able to hit a target that size if you can't shoot a 6 minute group slow fire, hence the point of that standard. Okay? And then this aiming stadia gets progressively smaller for these different aiming references, because it's also your range estimation for these different distances. You can also see ballistically what effect that has. Going from 100 to 200 is a very, very tiny amount of difference, because you're not getting that much drop at that distance, right? You go from 1 to 3 and it's obviously a bunch more. You go from 3 to 4, it's even more still. You start getting down to here, 600 to 700, 700 to 800, you have to hold way higher up in order to get that extra 100 yards, because the bullet is slowing and dropping that much faster the further away it gets. Okay, shot process. So one of the big changes with the training circulars is a complete change to how we teach fundamentals, or rather the base procedure for how to shoot. So the idea is, instead of having some fixed fundamentals, like say 4 of them, where you go through in a simplified checklist, the idea is that you break this down into 3 phases: your pre-shot, shot, and post-shot. Okay? Pre-shot is all the stuff that you did to line up to get ready to shoot. Shot is actually actual execution of release of the shot, and then post-shot is all the stuff that you do after. All right? So as an example, your pre-shot would be getting into position, establishing a natural point of aim, getting your initial aim on the target, ensuring that you have a stable enough hold. The shot is actually finalized refinement of aim. Make sure you got hard front sight focus, for example, if you're using iron sights, or that your reticle is centered in the tube in your objective lens. Your ocular lens. You maintain smooth trigger control, smooth press to the rear. Post shot would be follow through, calling your shot, tracking your sights in recoil, getting ready to shoot a follow-up shot if necessary. Okay, so the idea of why they're having that broke down is having some blank simplified step like 4 fundamentals Well, that might might fail to encapsulate important ideas for other things, but it emphasizes stuff that might not be important for other stuff. Okay, breath control is hideously unimportant. I don't know why people in the Army insist on it being important. It absolutely is not. I blame the fact that you had this model, 4 fundamentals, and it had 4 steps you're supposed to do. And the breathing one had the single diagram that was the easiest to copy and show. I think that's where the emphasis came to, and everyone just got hooked on this idea, well, if shots are doing this, then it must be breathing. And no, it's not. And that's part of the reason why they just chucked it out, because it's like you just need to throw that model away and start from scratch in order to get to what's actually important. With that shot process model, you can further break that down into functional elements that you can use to describe what you're doing in your pre-shot, shot, post-shot. So stability is your ability to hold a position stable, right? You're using support or getting lower to the ground, whatever that is. Aiming depends upon the device that you're using. Iron sight, hard front sight focus, obviously. If you're using an optic, ensuring that you understand where to position it so you have a full field of view and that you can see the reticle clearly. A lot of optics have an ocular adjustment. You have the idea of being able to focus that so that your the reticle itself, the image that you get in there is clear. If you wear glasses like I do, and like with night vision devices, I wouldn't wear glasses like this with certain night vision devices. So I would focus the objective lens to ensure that I get good, clear field of view and the reticle appears clear even with my uncorrected vision, which is going to be not what someone else needs, okay? But that's something you need to understand as a functional element to ensure you know how to use your equipment and make it work. Control kind of covers the breadth of all the things that lead to what good control is. And something even like trigger control, understood to be important, will define what good trigger control looks like. Well, it depends. What are you shooting? Am I shooting action pistol at 8-inch plates on a falling plate rack at 10 meters as fast as I can go? Or am I shooting a target far enough away that it scales about 2-3 minutes of angle wide with a precision rifle off of a bipod? Those are going to dictate differences in my shot process. Part of that pre-shot process may be evaluation of your conditions. Do I need to worry about what wind is doing if I'm shooting at targets inside a room 10 meters away? Obviously not, but it starts to play a big factor if I'm shooting well past 300, 400, 500 meters. Part of the shot process has to include that stuff because these are all things you need to take into account in order to make that work. Okay? And then movement is just getting into and out of your positions, all the stuff that you need to do that. So making adjustments to your natural point of aim, moving through your shooting positions on the qualification, fight up, fight down, get to a supported kneeling to supported standing, for example. That's all part of the movement portion you may need to do depending on what your course is, what you're shooting. Okay, carry positions. This goes into the safety thing. Instead of running stuff like clearing barrels and cleaning rods and stuff like that, you're better off getting people used to handling their weapons and carrying them and being comfortable with that. I don't know how you're going to manage to be in a field environment if we're scared of letting people just carry their weapons. Okay? So part of that, in addition to the weapon safety rules, use an ECI if you need to feel a little more insured, but you're better off getting people used to the habit of carrying this appropriately. So something like a safe hang position on the far right of the screen, for example, would be perfect in a field environment. The weapon is readily accessible, it's across your front, you're maintaining good control, and where is the muzzle pointing? Not at your feet and not at anyone else. So if that soldier does a complete 360-degree turn, where did that muzzle point? At the ground, off to the side of his feet, which is exactly where he wants to go. So even if he does a turn around to look at something, he's not flagging half the platoon. Okay? That may not be the fastest to employ, so something like a low ready might be better. Okay, getting used to the idea, like my hands are on the weapon, I'm at low ready, I can take a shot as soon as it presents, but I'm still maintaining positive control that I'm not flagging anybody if I need to rotate, turn around, okay? Now, if you have to have a reason that I can't point towards the ground for some reason, you know, like it would shoot through the floorboards and there's somebody down there, I might want to carry it a high ready. I'm maintaining muzzle awareness, rule 2 again, but I'm able to maneuver around without flagging anyone in my immediate vicinity, okay? We can be doing this in a range environment, and we need to, because if we're constantly scared of letting people handle this stuff properly, they're never going to learn how to handle it properly. So learn how to do it on a range is the first best time to do so. Let them learn how to walk around the range like this, and they'll eventually develop these good habits because you've allowed them to. Okay, so this first function element, stability, that basically goes into setting up a position that is stable, right? So bone support versus muscle support. Make use of items, whether it's a bipod, whether it's a structure. Part of the qualification, as we are now supposed to be shooting it, is that there's supposed to be a barricade on your firing point. You're supposed to be using it for stability, from kneeling supported and standing supported, okay? You know, so developing a position that will allow you to stabilize is going to help you get stuff. Part of stability and building a good position is learning what a good natural point of aim is. You can see one of the reasons why we had to get away from the old 4 fundamental. That wasn't anywhere in the model. But it's an important concept. Does anyone know what an NPA is? Natural point of aim.
Direction to aim when you are point. General area where you.
There you go. Yeah, the weapon wants to, based on the position and how you're holding the weapon, it will tend to want to point towards something. You want to get that natural point in line with your intended point of aim. In other words, you want it to naturally want to aim at the thing you're trying to hit in the first place. And you move your position around so that is in fact the case. Okay? Learning what your NPA is also establishes that your position must be good. Because if it's inconsistent, you're not going to have a good natural point of aim to base off of because you're not really able to set it up like you need to. Okay? Recoil management is another part of stability. A good rule of thumb some trainers like to work with, even if you're going to take individual precision shots, you should be in a position where you could fire a 5-round burst from that position. It should allow you to mitigate recoil. Even people that shoot bench rest or more precision rifle stuff, they want to see that the sight wants to tend to track back down to whatever they were originally aiming at. First indicator, if it doesn't do that, your natural point of aim was probably off. If it doesn't want to tend to track back to what you were shooting at, it's probably going, it's like having a spring that you release, it's going to return towards whatever its natural center is, right? Your position is probably going to, the sight is probably going to tend to track to whatever your natural point of aim actually was. And if it isn't in line with what you're trying to shoot, it probably means that that was off. So that's another reason to do the recoil management thing. For speed shooting, it's clearly important. The sight doesn't want to track back to what you're trying to shoot at. It's going to be difficult to get a second, third, fourth, or whatever shot back on it. Okay? It's like watching someone who's good with a machine gun. They're not trying to bear down and stop the thing from moving. They're just trying to manage the recoil so that it tends to reset back in line with their target every time they're touching off a burst, and that's going to maintain a controlled tight cone of fire. Okay, this you see this diagram in all the training circulars, and it's just describing what kinds of positions are either low, moderate, or high stable, which is pretty obvious. Standing is less stable than prone. Okay, so these are the basic positions that we will for sure be using for the qual because they're also pretty usable for a field environment. So prone is the one everyone's used to because the old qual is pretty much all we ever did. The one thing we finally included in the training circular, use your magazine for support. It does not induce a malfunction. It never did. Anyone that said so is feeding myths and lies. Service conditions competitors have been using a mag-supported prone position by a matter of choice for decades. We finally have a training circular that reflects that known reality. Okay? So anytime you're low enough that you can touch the mag for support, do it. It does not cause any issues with reliability. It only increases your base of support. And it puts you in a position that you're as low to the ground as you can get. There's other reasons why that might be good. Kneeling supported. You'll notice that this right-hand shooter is bracing his right elbow on his right leg. That will look different than a more conventional kneeling if you're shooting unsupported. For obvious reasons, you'll probably use your non-shooting arm, your left arm in this case, on your left knee in a more conventional kneeling position. If you're shooting unsupported, that makes total sense. If I got something to brace the front end of that weapon with, why do I want to put my elbow under that? I'm going to have less stability back behind me. I should put my shooting arm and stabilize that. You do that right and you're starting to get stability that's more like prone. Okay? And then from a standing position, same idea. I can use a barricade or a wall or something like that as a point of stability. This is also encouraging me to make use of cover as well. Because if I need to use that piece to stabilize my position, I'm also getting behind it. Okay, aiming concept. One of the things that was in the old FM, but whether it was emphasized very well or not is debatable. In order to maintain good consistent sight alignment, you need to maintain good consistent cheek to stock weld and head position. Okay? If you need to set your sight up and have a consistent mount on the weapon so that you get a consistent relationship with your aiming eye to whatever the reticle is. Full field of view or centered front sight. No shadow if it's a magnified optic. The reticle, if it's a red dot or some kind of a holo sight, for example, should tend to want to appear centered in the available field of view. If that isn't consistently happening, you're not putting your head in the right point because you're not getting your eye behind it like you need to. Okay? And this is just giving you a diagram picture of what that should look like. And then along with aiming, depending on what you're shooting at, how far away it is, what the wind conditions are, and a bunch of other stuff, you may not necessarily be aiming dead center of a target in order to hit it. So what this diagram on the low left is showing here is different hold-offs that you might use as a way to compensate for, say, wind condition. If you have a known wind that's going to blow you off target, you're going to have to hold in order to compensate for that. If you need to communicate that to someone, instead of thinking in terms of minutes or mils, you may want to talk in terms of the amount of favor. So like a full favor or a hold point 1, you're actually holding the edge, left edge or right edge of that target. So like for service conditions, for example, if we're using ACOGs and we don't want to do sight adjustments, because sometimes the adjusters are a little mushy on them and you don't want to, they don't have a dependable return to zero to click them on and off and whatnot. So we prefer to use hold-offs, favor off on the target. So your coach or you yourself will determine that based on conditions, I need to use a hold point 1 or a hold point 2 or whatever it is. That is essentially using how much of the apparent width of the target you are holding off in order to put a favor left or right to compensate for prevailing conditions. Okay? It's just a way to communicate that. For range estimation or shooting at distance, you have the same thing. Elevation, of course. If you aren't putting it on the sight, if you're not using a bullet drop compensator, whether on an iron sight or an optic, you either can spin, dial that to what your hold off needs to be, or it may be built into the reticle, like an ACOG and a lot of our thermal sights and night sights, for example, or you may need to do a physical hold off, and this is kind of the same idea. Hold point 1 would be like on the edge of the target, top edge or bottom edge, in order to determine a hold off that you need to, for elevation purposes. Okay, wind. Yes, the wind moves the bullet when it flies. The further away you are, the more that effect is going to be. So the first thing you need to determine is how much it's moving. That ends up being learned by feel. You can get gauges, of course, to measure it more exactly. The general rule of thumb is that if you can barely feel it, it's a 3 miles an hour or less. If it's enough that you are starting to see leaves in constant motion, like little flickering of leaves on a tree, for example, or enough to maybe blow one across the ground, you're probably somewhere around 5 to 8 miles an hour. We start getting 8 to 10, that would be enough if there was dust on a road, for example, that you would see that kind of like getting pushed around, getting swirled. Or if there was loose paper on the ground, like a target or like a loose piece of paper, it'd be enough to push that around. 12 to 15 miles an hour, that'd be enough to actually see a small tree start to move. All right, so these are just very generic rules of thumb to get a guess. And a lot of times you end up just kind of getting a feel for what that is. There you go. So here's my easy estimates for elevation and for hold-offs for wind, okay? And if you ever play with an M16A2, you just count the clicks on the dial and you'll confirm where I got this from. Basically, you do a come up in minutes of angle for each increment of 100-yard increment based on the yard line you're at. So I go up 1 minute to go to 200. If I'm at 200, I go up 2 minutes to go to 300. If I'm at 300 yard, 300 meter line, I go click up 3 minutes, that should put me on at 4. If I'm at 400, I click up 4, that should put me on at 5. That makes sense? So the yard line, the distance that you're at in 100 meter increments, you go up that many minutes to go to the next 100 meter distance, or 100 yard distance. So if I'm at 400 yards, I go up 4 minutes, that should put me on or really close at 5. That's just a good rough estimate. It might not be dead perfect, it'll probably put you somewhere in a silhouette at least, okay? For windage, a full value 10 mile an hour wind is worth 1 minute of angle for every 100 meters or 100 yards, okay? So if I'm at 100 meters and it's a full value 10 mile an hour wind, it's worth about a minute. If I'm at 500 meters, a full value 10 mile an hour wind is worth 5 minutes. Okay? Now based on angular measure, if I'm 1 minute at 100, how many inches am I off at 100? 1, right? If I'm 5 minutes off at 500, how many inches am I off? 500 meters, 500 yards, 500 meters, right?
25 inches.
25 inches, that's over 2 feet. So it's the same wind, at 100 it's an inch, at 500 it's 2 feet. Okay, so that's how much more of a difference that makes the further away that you get. Obviously, if it's not exactly 10 miles an hour, you'll cut that in half if it's 5 miles. You add and double it if you're at 20 miles an hour. That makes sense? If it's a half value, meaning full value, meaning it's perpendicular to your line of fire. Okay? The flag is sticking straight out left or right. If I'm not at that, if it's angled a decent amount, about 45 degrees, we're going to cut that adjustment value in half. Okay? So if I'm at a half value wind, but it's actually 10 miles an hour, whatever I estimated this was, cut it in half. The speed is slower, cut it in half again. Okay, so that's just a way to get a decent estimate without having to consult like a data book or something like that. All right. All right, control aspect. This is your conscious actions before, during, and after the shot process. The primary thing that screws most people up in terms of trying to shoot better is recoil anticipation, flinching. Okay? And a good telltale way to indicate that is watch a shooter as they fire, and especially if you put dummy rounds in their weapon, in their magazine, what is their response action when that shot goes click instead of bang? If they have visible movement, if they blink their eyes, they're having some unconscious reaction to that shot going off, they are anticipating recoil, and they are moving, disrupting control of that weapon as the shot's being released. Okay? Another issue that you have with the control here is your follow-through. You want to ensure that you're continuing to do the same basic things as you release that shot so that you're not encouraging any recoil anticipation, right? This is no different than any other common concept in sports. You swing through the golf club, through the golf ball. You don't stop at the tee, right? If you're going to bat the ball, you don't stop at contact. You swing through, you follow through. It's the same idea. When you trigger a shot, you're holding the trigger to the rear, you're watching, because you were watching the sight pre-shot and shot, so why would you stop watching the sight? You want to watch it in post-shot as well. What is that sight doing when it moves in recoil? Where did it move off of? How do you know if you did that? Your shot window is approximately 1/10 of a second. So all of the information that you're going to get in order to determine was that a good shot or not occurs within a window of 1/10 of a second. So how would you know if you did it right? Obviously you look at the target and it's going to tell you where the bullet actually went. How do you know what you did if you got it right or not? Is there a way we can predict that? Is it reasonable to expect we should predict that? Okay, so the concept is if you're having a good follow-through, you should be able to call a shot. So this is just an example of what a plot sheet may look like. We used to issue these back when we were doing up through the first versions of Train Fighter. Every soldier going through basic would get a plot book that would have some. Made this look like our current zero target. Diamond in the middle of a black circle, right? But the idea is that you have a miniature version of the target you're shooting at. You got a small version of it. You fire a shot, and the first thing you should do is, before I look at the target, where did that go? What did I do? Was that a good shot or not? Was it not a good shot? Okay, well, it's not good. Was it left, right, high, or low? How much? Was it in the diamond at least? Was it in the black? Where did it go? Make some prediction off of what you saw or what you thought you saw. You plot it on one of these small targets, and then you observe the target, or the group possibly. You could do that in 3-shot, 5-shot strings. Plot where you thought that group ended up, and then go look at the actual target, and then write down what had happened, and then see if that correlated or not. This is part of your shot process development. Because if you can't take a shot, watch your sights, make an accurate prediction about what the hell you just did, and every time you look at a target, it's like a mystery. It's like throwing dice. I wonder what's going to happen next. You're never going to get any good at this. You need to be able to see what you're doing, take conscious feedback from your actions and correlate that into what the effect on the target is. And this is just a way, using a plot call, a sheet to plot your calls is just a way to affect that. Oh, and the fact that no one in the Army does this is part of the problem. You're basically eliminating the tools of feedback that would normally be necessary for anyone that wants to get good at this. Go check out someone who shoots good high power. I assure you they got books, plural, of these kinds of things filled, because that's exactly how they're running their training and practice in order to get good at their discipline. Okay, part of the gun handling, your employment, workspace management. The basic idea is that when you're doing gun handling management at speed, like reloads or malfunction clearances, you want to have it in a position that you can see and work with it. If you imagine a workspace about, a foot in diameter or so, that is where the thing should be so you can work with it. So like as this picture is showing here, she has this rifle where she can see it. She's not looking down at the ground. She's still able to kind of see out in front of her as needed, but she also has the thing in front of her so she can look at it and work out on it as needed. Okay? All right, basic idea, control of fire. Obviously, grouping and zeroing with slow semi-automatic or just slow fire, single shots. Ideally, you should be calling those shots, plotting them even. These are the different paces that you may shoot in other engagements. You don't have to worry about this for qualification. Main point I wanted to make with this was suppressive fire is an effect of placement, not necessarily a volume. Okay? You don't increase suppressive fire by increasing your volume unless those fires are properly directed. Okay, drills. So every one of the training circulars has a section on drills, Appendix Delta, in the relevant TC for the weapon. The drills are a standardized or structured approach to how to handle this weapon beyond your shot process, okay? So for a rifle, for example, drill alpha is your weapons check. So that would be, what condition are you in? You know, am I green, am I in amber, am I in red? If someone needs you to show clear, go to condition green, you would be doing that as drill A. I need serial numbers for your equipment, serial numbers for your rifle, for example. I need you to demonstrate a functions check. Okay, that's all administrative. Think of A as administration here. Okay, B would be handling the rifle from a slung or unslung position and go through some of your, demonstrate that you can go from a safe hang to a compressed ready. In other words, you have an understanding about how to handle this weapon moving through different positions. The equipment check is basically, am I ready to go? So I'm checking my magazines are filled. I'm checking my CCO is on, the battery is working. You know, any of that stuff that I'm ready to go. Drill D is load. You know, load from bolt forward or bolt to the rear. You know, go to condition amber, go to condition red, for example. Drill echo is your carry, so you would move through different methods of carry in a series. I'm going to go from safe hang to compressed ready to low ready to high ready, or something like that, some sequence. Okay, now you're getting into like weapon handling at speed. So fight down, that would be, I'm going to start from a standing position, maybe compressed ready or low ready. I'm going to go from standing to kneeling, because that would be probably my next position down. And then I'm going to go from kneeling to prone. Do that in like a sequence, right? Fight up, this is part of what we're going to be doing for the qual. You'll start from ready, standing, ready, right, low ready, and you're going to do drill H. I'm sorry, well, you're going to do a snapshot first, which I'll talk about the qual here in a second. You're going to do a snapshot on your first target, then you're going to go to prone. So from the standing position, you're going to drop to a prone position, and you're going to engage your first two phases of that qual, right? After you've shot the prone portions, you have to reload and move into kneeling supported. And then move into standing. Well, that's essentially a fight up drill, okay? Reload, of course, is completely reloading while using your equipment. So not having the magazine staged, I want to be in a position where I've got my gear sorted out that I can do a reload in some reasonable time frame, possibly while moving through positions, fight up, fight down, go to prone, etc. Clear malfunction. We'll talk about that here in a second, and then do an unload, show clear. That puts you back into drill A, which would be your administration stuff. Okay, so this is just going over part of your drill A can be a functions check. Basics of that haven't changed. The only thing I will put in, TACOM had released a concern with some M4s about checking whether or not the thing, if you moved it from a safe to semi or from semi to burst, that it might allow the hammer to drop. So as an additional part of your functions check, in addition to doing the, check to see if it's on safe and it doesn't work, and then flip it to semi and it works, rack the bolt, hammer stays to the rear, release the trigger, put it to burst. I should be able to pull the trigger and it should fall, right? Well, you should also, having racked the charging handle, rack the bolt to the rear, pull the trigger on safe, and then slowly rotate the selector to safe, from safe to semi. What they were finding was there were some M4s that would cause the hammer to drop by moving the safety. That's not good. Okay, so they put that safety of use message out in order to indicate that is something you should add in as a safety check, part of your drill A, to confirm the functions check that this thing is working like it's supposed to. Okay, and I'll demonstrate that here in a second. Basic concept of loading remains the same. You keep it load bolt forward, you're in condition amber. You load from the bolt lock to the rear, insert a magazine, drop the bolt, you're in condition red. This is just a picture example of like reloading. The idea is getting your gear set up. You know the Pokey Bay holsters? Yeah, those are for magazines. So you should probably learn how to reload from those. That's the idea. You have your load-bearing equipment so that the magazine should be positioned in a manner so that when you move through positions, you can grab a full magazine and reload the thing without having to look at it and fumble around in order what I have to do to get ready. One of the problems with the old Koala was we never required you to do that. Reloading was an administrative task that the tower directed you to do, and watch your, rotate your safe to semi and watch your lane, because we got to remind you to take the safety off too. Hence part of the problem, as opposed to being able to do a decently quick reload from your gear in different positions. Clear malfunctions. One of the things that TC was drop sports. Why? Because it was overly, it was trying to encapsulate too many steps that often were not needed. The idea is that you should instead think in terms of applying a corrective action, not a single rote 6-step thing regardless of what happened. The idea is if the thing doesn't work, tap the magazine and rack the action. So with an M16, M4, you're going to take the chart, tap the magazine and rack the bolt. It's either going to work or it's not. If it doesn't, you need to do remedial action, which is go to condition green and figure out what's wrong. Because doing the whole observe while you're doing the sports and this, like, well, do you do sports once or twice and forget it. Tap it, rack it, and go. If that doesn't fix it, you need to do remedial. You need to clear it, you need to figure out why it's not working. Okay? That keeps it, that 90+% of the problem will be fixed by doing a tap rack with anything that feeds from a magazine. Actually, machine guns on the same deal too. If you can't rack it back and have it shoot next, you need to just take it down. Remedial action, go to condition green, figure out what the problem is, and then continue. This really goes in with more of an understanding of what the cycle of function is. And that kind of leads into problems, the whole concept of people thinking, well, if I do sports twice, that'll fix it. No, it can't, because it means you don't understand what this cycle of function is actually doing. The things that cause the sports steps to fail means that there's some other underlying problem that you haven't identified, and that's the point. If a simple tap rack doesn't work, you need to clear it and figure out why. Okay, some ideas with zeroing. The main problem I see on most Army ranges is you don't use peer coaches. You should go to a firing point with 2 people, the shooter and a coach. The coach has to be a peer, fine. Your battle buddy or whatever you want to call your friend should be there with you. You'll notice in this example, you have a shooter, the coach is watching the shooter, not the target, not the sky, not the birds. The coach is watching the shooter, even if it's a peer. If I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing wrong, I get a third-person perspective. If it's like, dude, you got a nasty flinch because I watched you scrunch your face every time you pulled the trigger, well, that's a feedback point that you might not have gotten before. That's what this guy is doing. You'll notice that he's got a pair of binos. Our preferred way when we do zero is, shooter's done shooting, we don't call the line cold. You look downrange with binos. I ain't going to walk down there. I can look at the target with a pair of binos or I can get $15 binos at a PX and I can see 22 caliber bullet holes at 25 meters. Why am I calling the line cold? Fire your group on a clean target, 3 or 5 shots, 5 shots preferably, and then let the optics do your walking. That means I can look at my target and I'm not waiting for someone else to stop screwing around. I can just look at my target, we can make a decision. If this guy is having shooting issues, maybe he needs to work on a dry exercise. I'm not holding up the line by doing that, because if someone else wants to look at their target, they use optics to do it. All right, this is what the current zero target. I won't call it the new target because it's 5 years old now, but you probably haven't seen it before. So here's what this is called, the Alpha Zero, and it's a short-range rifle and pistol marksmanship target. It's a bullseye, basically, but it's designed specifically with all our weapon systems in mind. In the center is a 4-inch circle. It's a diamond. Okay, so that is that 4-inch circle. I'm sorry, let me start again. That is a 4-centimeter square shaped like a diamond that is inside a 4-centimeter dashed line. It's about 1 inch. Okay? That is 4 minutes of angle at 25 meters. This next dashed line is 6 minutes of angle. All right, and it's got a series of concentric rings. We can use this for a variety of exercises. So for example, why was this shape picked? Well, if I have iron sights, it gives me a defined white on black, high contrast aiming reference. I have a flat squared reference for the edge of my flat square front sight. If I have a CCO, I have a 2 or 4 minute circle that should fit neatly inside here. High contrast aiming point. If I have an ACOG that's got a chevron shape, oh, you mean exactly like a diamond. So it works with all these different sights. If I put this target at 100, now that black circle is 4 minutes of angle if I'm 100 meters away. So this was 4 minutes here. Now this is 4 minutes if I have it at 100. I could use this at a variety of distances. This is also an excellent pistol target. It's a pistol bullseye target too. So I can use this for rifle shooting from 25 to 100 meters. I can use this for pistol shooting from 10 to 25 meters or so, and it works ideally for all the above. You can use it for competitions because this is actually scoring rings like a bullseye target, so shoot a bullseye match. The Army just gave you one. The idea with the zero procedure is that is a calibration exercise. So when you're on the 25 meter range, you don't have to be wearing your gear. The only protective equipment you need is eye protection and ear hearing protection. That's it. Shoot it slick. That's what the training circular explicitly directs. That's what you're supposed to do. You obviously have to learn how to shoot with your gear. That's what the validation exercises are for. That's what the drills are for. That's what your table 5 exercises are for, right? You practice with the gear after you've established good shooting procedures, good zero, and then you practice with your gear, and when you feel confident to go, then you go to table 6 and you shoot your ball.
Excuse me.
All right. Next one, I got a question. So go ahead.
You said no safety except for iPro on the zero?
Yes, the training circular directs that zeroing exercises done at 25, or any distance, doesn't matter the distance, but 25 meter ranges where most soldiers are used to doing it, is to be shot slick. That means just your uniform. No body armor, no field gear, no helmet. You wear soft cap, eye pro, ear pro. That's it.
All right, thank you.
That's it. That's what's in the training circular, by the way. I did not make that up. All right, so this is just giving you a basic idea of a group in a zero. We had this example here where if you're going to stop the range and go down, of course, then you can mark where your groups are. The idea is that you're still trying to group to standard. 6 minutes. 6 minutes is the minimum standard. That's the outer dashed ring. 4 minutes is the preferred standard. That's a 1-inch circle within this dashed circle. That's 4 minutes of angle at 25 meters. That's where you prefer to have your group end up. The mark of let me back up. The grid is a minute of angle. It doesn't correspond to any particular number of clicks because it depends what are you shooting with. So just to give you an example of how this kind of screws things up. The original idea with the train fire model from 1980 was you don't have to learn ballistics or anything. I'm going to give you a zero target with little cartoons in the corner and it's going to tell you what to do with your sights. You don't have to think. The target will think for you. And that works as long as everyone shoots the exact same rifle with the exact same ammunition and that's it, right? You 1 click per square. I don't have to know why or what for. Just do what the target says. Well, we're going to upgrade to the M16A2. No problem. We'll adjust the target. It's 3 clicks per square for windage, 1 click per square for elevation. You're still good. Carry on. Well, it's not quite right ballistically. Just go 3 plus 1, and that's close enough. We got you. Well, now we got the M16A4. Now we got the M4. Now we got all these cool optics, and now I got lasers. Oh, wait, now none of this works because the offsets aren't the same. Because it depends. What am I zeroing with? Well, we never taught anyone what any of this means, so we're going to create this book called the Small Arms Integration Book. And it's going to have a series of index charts that's going to go through all of the offsets for all the possible equipment combinations that we might issue. So in the name of simplicity, the Army decided that we need a 448-page indexed manual to avoid teaching you what these squares actually mean in the first place. Okay? So what they decided instead was, why don't we just teach you mils and minutes? All your sites work on that anyway. We'll include a couple common site setups and just tell you right here. This is the windage in minutes. This is the elevation in minutes. Each square on this target is 1 minute at 25 meters. You'll have to figure out what the clicks are, but that's in your your technical manual, and you should probably learn how to be familiar with your equipment anyway, so it's an exercise in learning how this works. Okay? All right. Validation exercises. The emphasis should be on shooting validation, not on shooting the qual. The qual is should be nothing more than a check on learning that all your training and validation up to that point worked. That's why you're only supposed to do it once. You go to the qual range, I'm ready to go for record, you shoot it once, you're done. And if you treat it in that mindset, you will do your training procedures better. So like one example is, put a stack of 0 targets up on 25 meters. Paper's cheap. You let your folks use optics. You don't have to call the line cold. You're going to be cold for 5 to 15 minutes every time someone shoots a single group. Why? Let them shoot. Work on exercises. I can work on different short-range exercises, field exercises. We can do this all at 25 meters using scaled targets. Buy up little scaled silhouettes that represent maybe 100, 200, 300 meter distance, scaled. You know, the original Alt-C wasn't supposed to be a qual. It was supposed to be a validation exercise that you shot to determine if you were ready to go to the qual range. But someone decided, well, you know, it'd be easier if we didn't have to do that other thing, and they just used it as a cheater course. But the idea is that you validate your skills and determine if you're ready, and if you're not, you use this as a means to practice to get ready, so that when you hit the qual, you can pass it in one go. All right, this gives you an idea what the barricades are to be used for the qualification. That's what the current TC lists as official dimensions. But the real idea is that you just need something that allows you to shoot around it from a kneeling and a standing position. That's really the main thing. Whether you shoot across the top or along the side, or you kneel through this or along, it doesn't matter. The main thing is that you have something you can use for a standing position and a kneeling position supported to simulate shooting around cover while you shoot the qual. That's all that is really important. All right, so this is getting into the tables of fire. So the new qualification is now run. Okay, back up. Train Fire 1980 was 2 tables of fire, 20 rounds each, prone supported or foxhole supported, and then prone unsupported, and that was it. Around 2007, changed it to 3 tables. They added 10 rounds of kneeling, took 10 rounds away from prone supported. Okay. None of the gun handling was ever tested. Tower told you what to do. Someone else probably filled your magazine for you, okay? Part of what this new course is supposed to do is have you set up to demonstrate that you can run through these exercises without having additional instruction. So it's pretty much, okay, shooters on the line. Table 6, qualification, load. Or makes go, condition red. Weapons free. And that's it. You're going to run all phases in a row. The range is structured so that you will run all 40 targets back to back with no pause in between. Now, there are pauses between the tables, but they're timed. So, basic time runs, you start with 4 magazines of 10 rounds each. 3 of them in your load-bearing equipment, 1 loaded, ready to go in condition red. Your single targets are exposed for 5 seconds. Your double targets are engaged for 8. Triple targets are engaged for 12 seconds. And quadruple engagements are exposed for 16 seconds. There's a 3-second delay between each engagement. So whether it's 1, 2, 3, or 4 targets pop up, they will be up for 5, 8, 12, or 16 seconds, depending how many targets that was. When that engagement is over, the targets are down or you knocked them over, whichever came first. There's a 3-second delay, and then the next ones come up. And you'll do that until that phase is complete. There will be no commands from the tower. When that phase is complete, you should be at bolt lock because you 10 rounds for 10 total targets. You reload and move into the next position. There's no command to do that. There's a 10-second transition delay between the phases. No command. So you shoot the bolt lock, reload, get ready to go. 10 seconds later, the targets start running whether you're ready to go or not. You're then in the next phase. Same timing applies, 5, 8, 12, or 16 seconds for each engagement. 3 seconds between each of those engagements until you've engaged all 10 targets. You're done with that phase. 10-second delay. You reload, move in the next position. The targets start running whether you're ready or not. So this is a breakdown of all the tables. The basic rundown is you get a single 5-second exposure at 50 meters. You shoot standing offhand, standing unsupported. Low ready, engage that target. As soon as you shoot, hit or miss, you go to prone drill. And you're shooting the next 2 phases from the prone position. Okay? So you'll start with a single engagement at 100, and then another single engagement at 150, and then a triple engagement, 50, 150, 200, and then a quadruple engagement at 150, 200, 250, and 300. That's phase 1. You'll be a bolt lock, reload, get ready for phase 3. Phase 2. You do a single engagement, a double engagement, a double engagement, and a triple engagement. That's phase 2. 10-second delay, that moves you into phase 3. This is all from kneeling supported. So when you reload, you go to the kneeling supported position and shoot that. And then you'll finish out phase 4 from the standing supported position. Okay? I will bring up a video because I can show you a video of that complete run through. But that's all I have for the rifle stuff. So, I guess the question would be, do you want me to do the pistol stuff now, or should we do the drill section first? I'm going to call it that we should do the drill section first, whoever's going to be doing that.
Yeah, I think.
That's the hands-on part. Whoever's going to be participating in that would be doing
The hands-on part.